So there's quite a lot going on in the world right now, and here in Singapore, most of us are now working from home. So this here is my room, my desk, and I can't really move around that much now because of all the equipment I have to bring back from the office. But nevertheless, let's talk about something a little more interesting, specifically the AMD Ryzen 4000 series for laptops. So for the past couple of weeks, I've been using the Zephyrus G14 from Asus as my mobile workstation. In fact, if you watch my Alienware M15 R2 review, that entire video was edited right on this machine. And I have to say, I was really impressed. The render times, especially even in 4K, was nothing short of amazing. But anyways, back to the laptop. The model that I have right here is basically the top spec model. It runs the Ryzen 9 4900HS and RTX 2060 Max-Q, 16GB of RAM and a 1TB NVMe SSD. So those are the specs, and if you can't yet tell, it's a really powerful machine, especially for a 14-inch form factor. Which, speaking about that, let's talk a bit about the design. The G14 is available in two color choices, black or white, and as you can tell, I have the latter. Honestly, I find this generation of laptops from ROG to be much more subdued in design, and I do appreciate it instead of the flashy gamer aesthetics. The lid does feature this split design in which you can also opt for the Any-Me display, which basically allows you to customize GIFs and stuff through an array of LEDs. The current one that I have does not have that, but you can choose that configuration should you decide to buy this laptop. The entire laptop is made out of a magnesium alloy and it does feel really rigid and dense, which makes it feel quite premium. It also does feature a matte coating which helps resist fingerprints. For the white version, it actually isn't exactly entirely white. The main chassis is actually more of a silver, which also translates down to the keys and the trackpad itself. For the display, you do get two options. One that features a 1440p 60Hz panel, or this one right here, which is a 1080p 120Hz panel. Both are pretty good with 100% sRGB coverage, though personally I would spring for the 1080p panel simply because of the higher refresh rate. One thing to note is that Asus did implement their ergo lift design, so when you open up the lid, it does prop the entire notebook at a slight angle, and this helps with airflow as there's now much more space between the intake fan on the bottom and your desk. Oh, and one thing to note, there isn't a webcam. So you don't get Windows Hello, but at the very least, Asus did implement a fingerprint reader right on the power button, so still not too bad. Speaking of which, the keyboard. I quite like it. It's generally the same keyboard layout as previous ROG laptops, and in essence, they are spaced well apart with a good amount of key travel and response. There are also 4 dedicated keys up top, 2 of which control volume, so you don't have to press the function key for that. The other is a mute mic key, which will be handy for streamers and gamers in general, while the last key launches ROG Armoury Crate, which is where you can basically tweak your profiles and settings for this laptop. Now for the trackpad, it's not too bad, although I feel that it can still be slightly larger, but in general, no qualms about it. Speakers. Speakers on this notebook is actually really good, especially when you consider it's in a 40-inch form factor. There's 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom on each side, and they sound great for consuming entertainment or gaming. But of course, I still suggest a good pair of cans, especially if you're editing or playing games. Moving on to I/O, we have 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, a Type-C 3.2 Gen 2 port on the right, and for the left, you have your power jack, HDMI 2.0, another Type-C 3.2 Gen 2, and your headphone mic combo jack. But more about this Type-C port on the left. This one supports not only DisplayPort 1.4 output, but also up to 65 watts of charging. So technically, you can just take a USB-C charger and charge the G14. And I think it might be useful for those of you who are off the grid or just strictly doing light tasks. For anything else, however, you definitely want to use the AC adapter to make full use of the CPU and GPU. As for upgrades, there are a few options. The entire bottom panel is secured with just your standard Phillips screws, and once you pop that off, you have access to mainly 3 things. The first is the SSD. The one in here isn't the fastest, but it's decent. And if you remove it, you will then have access to the Wi-Fi card right below it, which is actually Wi-Fi 6. The drawback, is the RAM, which will only have access to a single slot, and that's because the other half is actually soldered on. So the system ships with 16GB of RAM, but because half of it is soldered on, I guess the maximum amount of RAM you can get in this machine is 40GB of RAM. That is if you get a 32GB sodium stick, which is kind of a weird number. But we now come to what's most important in this review, which is the performance of the Ryzen 9 4900HS in this very machine. Now granted, we are a little bit late to the game, so by the time this video is published, perhaps Intel 10th Gen is already out and the landscape has changed. But nevertheless, let's get into it. So for now, I'm just gonna stick to a couple of tests and benchmarks that we usually do on this channel. And we are just gonna compare it to the Intel Core i9-9980HK that is found on the Pro Duo that I reviewed previously. So let's see how the two chips stack up. First up, we have Cinebench R20, and here it simply trashes the Core i9-9980HK in the multi-core score, achieving roughly a 25% increase in performance. And even for the single core score, it's pretty much neck to neck. Intel has always been king when it comes to lightly threaded applications, but with this, I guess everything is going to change. As for DaVinci Resolve 16, I did run the usual two tests that I usually do. As you can tell, the render times for the 10-minute 1080p project was roughly 30 seconds faster, while the 15-minute 4K project was pretty much the same. In short, for our testing, it's slightly faster. But hold up, there's a catch. There always is a catch. The moment you take into account that the Ryzen 9 is a 35W chip versus the 45W chip of the Core i9, and the sheer physical size difference between the Pro Duo and the G14, I would say that the results then become much more amazing. In terms of gaming, there isn't much of a difference given that it's the same RTX 2060, although the one in the G14 is a max-Q variant. But here are the results of a few games that I played on the G14. To keep it short, you have a great gaming experience, and even more so if you are playing esports titles thanks to the 120Hz display. So we've seen the performance, but you might ask, what about thermals? Thermals are not too bad, but there's a catch. In a full multi-core workload like Cinebench R20, you'll see that the CPU only topped up around 87 degrees Celsius on an all-core load at 3.7 GHz. Though to be frank, it completed the test so quickly the fans did not even spin up to full speed. During the render for DaVinci Resolve, you'll find that for the most part, the CPU will hit about 90 degrees Celsius on an all-core load at 100%, maintaining clocks at around 3.2 GHz. In terms of gaming, you can expect similar temperatures, though it will vary slightly depending on whether the game is more CPU heavy or GPU heavy. The catch here, however, is noise. This is not a silent laptop. There are three profiles: silent, balanced, and turbo, and all of our tests were done on the balanced profile, which I feel is the profile that offers the best balance between noise, performance, power limits, battery life, so on and so forth. Turbo does get you the best scores and thermals, but it's really loud. And as for silent, I would only recommend using that profile only if you are strictly doing light tasks. Battery life has also been vastly improved with this generation of Ryzen CPUs, and the G14 can easily last you 8 to 10 hours. AMD has finally caught up with Intel. About time. In conclusion, the Zephyrus G14 is probably the most powerful gaming notebook / mobile workstation for a 14-inch form factor. AMD has brought all the benefits from their desktop CPUs down to your mobile lineup, and I guess it's giving Intel added pressure. Now on the day of this review, Intel 10th Gen has yet to arrive, so the landscape might have changed somewhat. But if you are looking for a powerful desktop class 8-core 16-thread CPU in a 14-inch form factor, this is probably it. If you have any questions, drop us a comment down below, subscribe to us if you haven't, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Till the next one. See ya.